Okay, today I'm going to make a video, and the purpose of the video is to show you how you can use various techniques for coloring in any of your stamp sets that have an image around the stamp. So I'm going to use the Darling Donkeys. This is one of our celebration sets for January and February of 2021. So it is available when you purchase $50. And I'm going to show you today 8 different techniques for coloring in your Darling Donkeys, or you could actually use any image that you wish. Okay, so the first technique is the watercolor pencil technique. Now, the watercolor pencils, they are in the catalog, and the watercolor pencils come in 2 different sets. Okay, so the 2 sets, the basic set has Basic Black, Basic Gray, Bermuda Bay, Calypso Coral, Daffodil Delight, Early Espresso, Melon Mambo, Old Olive, Pacific Point, Pumpkin Pie, Real Red, Rich Razzleberry, and Whisper White. That's the watercolor set I'm going to use. There is this assortment too, and it has Balmy Blue, Cajun Craze, Cherry Cobbler, Coastal Cabana, Crushed Curry, Flirty Flamingo, Garden Green, Gorgeous Grape, Granny Apple Green, and Night of Navy. And with the watercolor pencils, I'm also going to use the Aqua Painters. Now, the Water Painters, they are on page 147 of the catalog, and they have 3 different tips. Here they are in the catalog. They have a large flat tip, a fine tip, and a medium tip. Okay, and you simply unscrew it and fill it with water. So it gives you a way of using water with your watercolor pencils really easily. So that's technique number 1. And this is what technique 1 will look like when we finish. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Early Espresso colored pencil, and I like to just follow the edges and lines of whatever it is that I'm working with. And you can color it in completely, but you don't have to. I generally think of the animal as having darker edges and softer on the inside. One thing to keep in mind is when you're working with your watercolor, you do need to have some sort of paper towel nearby. And I'm actually going to use the medium tip brush, and you can see the water in it, and you can squeeze it a little bit over your paper towel just to get some of the water down. And what I like to do is I actually like to start with the top of my figure. They say move in a left to right direction if you are right-handed, and here I am moving in a right to left direction. The paper that I'm using is not watercolor paper. It is the thick Whisper White cardstock, and I find that it works just as well for me. You do have to be careful not to apply too much water, and you just draw, and it's okay if you go outside of the lines because watercolor sort of has that soft look about it anyway. Okay, so there is my donkey, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to squeeze a little water out and wipe the tip of my brush off. And now I'm going to use just a little bit of the basic gray on the hooves. I don't need really much. And you can see how a little bit of color with the watercolor pencils really goes a long way. And if you want the hooves to be darker, you just apply more pencil. Okay, I'm going to squeeze my tip of my brush out. Now I'm going to give him some grass because right now he's kind of like just hopping around on nothing. So I'm just going to make some lines to ground my donkey, so to speak. And I just like to use sort of an upward motion with my brush. And you'll naturally have darker and lighter places. And there's my grass. I love the way that turned out. So that's technique number one. Technique number one, we used watercolor pencils and the Aqua Painter. These come 3 in a pack with different brush tips. Okay. All right. Technique number two, that's this one. And technique number two is using the Stampin Blends. So here are the blends. Okay, so I have quite a few blends here that I'm going to use. I have, let's see, I'll tell you the colors. This one is soft suede, and they come in 2 colors. So this is the dark soft suede and the light soft suede. They also have 2 tips, a fine tip and a brush tip. This one is the dark basic black. This one is light basic black. Then we have dark old olive and light old olive. And we have dark daffodil delight and light daffodil delight. This one is ivory. This one is a color lifter, and I'll show you how I'm going to use that as well. Now, I am not a colorist per se like some people are, but this is just my technique that I use, and you may have another technique. So the difference is we use the watercolor pencils first. You can see the pigmentation of my donkey using the blends, and this donkey I'm going to color similarly using, I'm going to try to use it the same way I did with this donkey right here. Now, one thing is I like to go light to dark when I try to really color anything, and I want the inside of his ear to be this ivory color. And then to create shading in that, I'm actually going to take the color lifter in the middle, and it brings out a little bit of the color. Now I'm going to use the soft suede, and I'm using the darker color first, and I'm using the fine tip, and I like to go along the edge. And usually wherever you see these little dots of shading, I try to follow that with my marker. And I don't color all of his legs in their entirety. Okay. And now I'm going to come back over that with the light soft suede. And I'm actually going to color over the dark soft suede to blend the 2 colors together. Once again, you might get out of the lines. It's okay. These are alcohol-based inks, and I'm just going to work the color darker on the edges. And I need a little bit more on his tail right there. Then I'm going to take the color lifter to give him some shading on his face. Okay, see how pretty that is? And I'm going to give him a little shading on his back. Draw a little bit of the color out like that. Okay, so that's what I use the color lifter for. And I feel like he needs a little bit of grass. So I'm going to start with my green, and I'm just going to make dots. Otherwise, I feel like he just looks like he's floating in space. And I try to make my grass tapered, I guess you could say. Okay. Then I'm going to come back with, that was the dark old olive, and then I'm going to come back with the light old olive, but this time with the brush tip, and kind of do an upward motion to blend the dots in. And patting across what I did earlier. And I seem to find that to be the best technique, is just to continue to add color on top of color until it looks the way you want it. You have such a rich tone with the alcohol inks. And I'm only going to use the light basic black on the hooves. And I'm finished with technique number 2. So technique number 1, we used watercolor pencils and Aqua Painters. Technique number 2, we used the Stampin Blends. Okay, now for technique number 3. All right, here we go. Technique number 3, we're going to use the Stampin Write Markers. Get my blends out of the way. So now I'll talk about the Stampin Write Markers that I have. This one is Early Espresso, Crumb Cake, Sahara Sand, Soft Suede, Blushing Bride, Old Olive, Pear Pizzazz, and then I have a blender pen also. Oh, and I also have a basic black. Okay, so for the Stampin' Write markers, now remember the blends were alcohol-based ink, and these are a water-based ink. So because this paper is not watercolor paper, I try not to over ink. So here's the example that I did right here. And what I try to do is I try to use the Stampin' Write markers kind of in a similar way to the blends. So I'm going to give them a little pink on the ear. Except this time I feel like I'm going to use light to dark. Okay. These don't blend in the same way that the blending pens do. You kind of have you kind of have to work them over each other, but you're not going to get quite the same effect. And I try to do it kind of quickly, actually. Okay. And I'm just using the fine tip to try to add some texture and shading, just a little bit. The fine tip is very fine on the Stampin' Write markers. Okay. And then a little bit darker. Just to create a little bit of shading, so the sun, like that. And I don't really do too much of the dark when I use the Stampin' Write markers like I do with the blender pens. And then I need to do the hooves. Okay. And I'm actually going to take this lighter color to work in the hooves right in there. Okay, you can go over it a little bit, but it doesn't, the ink doesn't work in the same way the blender pen does. So you might see darker spaces or lighter spaces. All right, he needs a little bit of grass. So with the grass, I'm going to use my brush tip. Let's see, I'm going to start with the darker one. And I'm just going to make little lines of color. And I'm going to use the lighter one on top of it. And I'm using the thicker side now. Don't forget to get the space right there and on the edges. All right, so that's technique number 3. And for technique number 3, we use the Stampin' Write markers. Okay, now we're still using the Stampin' Write markers. We're going to do technique number 4. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this blender pen. And I'm going to take my Stampin' Write marker and I'm going to rub some color onto my block. And I'm going to pick it up with the blender pen and then just color it in. As you work it, it will decrease in intensity. So you need to decide where it is you want the darker color first before it lightens on you. Okay, like that. And you have to be careful not to overwork the paper because it's not watercolor paper. Okay, so there's my darling donkey. And now I need to do the hooves. So, and it gives you kind of a softer tone than this one did. And I want this basic black. I don't need much of this. Okay, I'm going to tap off on a paper towel before I switch colors. Just need a little bit of this. It's such an intense color, you don't need much. Okay, like that. And then I'm going to tap off again because now I need to do some grass. There's dark green. There's the light green. Okay. Start with the dark green. Remember, it will decrease in intensity. Pick up the light green. Back to the dark green. Back to the light green. And there's my donkey. I do want to do his ears. Wipe that off. So I'm going to use a little bit of the pink. Get right inside the ear there. Okay. And that is technique number 4. So that is using a blender pen with the Stampin' Write markers. All right, the next technique, technique number 5. Now I need this. So for the ink on the block, you just wipe it off. Okay. So now so here's my example. So this one right here, you're going to use your Aqua Brush again, but this time you're going to use the Aqua Brush with the markers, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the color from the Stampin' Write marker. And you have to work kind of quickly. But it does give it a soft look. And I work from the outward in. Okay. To paint his ears, so I'm just going to pick up some of the pink, and I like that really very much. And then I'm going to put a little bit more pink because I want it to be a little bit brighter on the flower, if I can make it so. Yeah, I like that. That's better. And I'm going to wipe my brush off before I switch colors. And I'm going to go with a little bit of green. And this is kind of narrow, so just need a delicate touch there. And I need a little bit of gray for his hooves. Okay, there we go. And get that off of my brush. And now I'm going to the green. I'm going to start with the darker green. Just ground him a little bit and come back with the lighter green on top of it. I try not to over rub it. I actually like the way that one turned out versus my practice one. That's really nice. I'm happy with that. Alright, so that's technique number 5. That's using the Aqua Brush with the Stampin' Write markers, and you need a clear block for that. Alright, technique number 6. Alright, this is a fun one. This is an old technique. For this one, I am going to use my stamp pads. So if you don't have any markers but you have stamp pads, you can color with your stamp pads. And I'm going to use Q-tips. Everybody has Q-tips. So I'm going to use Q-tips and my stamp pads. And what I'm going to do is, I have show you the stamp pads I have. I have Soft Suede, Old Olive, Daffodil Delight, Crumb Cake, and Basic Gray. So what I like to do is, I'm actually going to start with, try to start with the lighter color. I guess I'll start with the Daffodil Delight. And you kind of mush, you squeeze and mush the pad so that you get ink in the lid. And that's what I'm going to work with. And then you need a clear block with just a little bit of water on it. And I find that the water helps put the fibers of the Q-tips sort of together. Otherwise, it kind of, you get these strands that you don't like. And I just need a little bit of ink for my flower. And I'm just going to very gently paint with my Q-tip. I like Q-tip coloring. I think it's a really pretty effect. That's all the yellow that I need. So I'm going to put that aside. And now I'm moving to the Old Olive. This is going to be for his stem. Move my water over here. And I just need a little bit. That's all I have on my Q-tip. And just gently tap. Okay, there we go. So now I have the stem and leaf of the flower. And I will come back and do the grass. I like to do the grass at the end. So I will come back and finish the grass in a minute. Okay, now I'm going to color my donkey. And I need to squish that a little bit more. There we go. Ah, that's better. And I'm going to saturate this Q-tip with quite a bit of water because I have quite a bit of painting to do, I guess you could say. I like how that looks. Oh, I missed a spot right there. And remember, I'm not using watercolor paper, so I'm going to try not to over saturate it. Okay. I'm happy with that. Here we go. And now I need to do the hooves, and I don't need much of the gray. I need more than that, obviously. There we go. A little bit more. Okay, I like that. That turned out really pretty. Now I'm going to go back and do my grass. Squish a little bit more. And put a little water. I'm just using my Aquacolor, my Aqua Painter, which obviously had some green left in it. Can you see the green tinge? Which I'm using green, so that's okay. And let me find a clean Q-tip. There we go. Just some up and down motions. So this one's a favorite. Everyone has Q-tips and most people have stamp pads. So you can color any design you have and it doesn't take very long. You just need a little bit of water. And I use my acrylic blocks, but you could use some other non-porous surface. So that's technique number 6. That's what I call the Q-tip method. All right, Q-tip method completed. I really like that. I like how the second one turned out better than the first one I did. Okay. Number 7, this is the practice one that I did, and this is what I call the paintbrush technique. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the stamp pads, and if you actually have paintbrushes, you can use this technique as well. And what we're going to do is I'm going to paint this using the ink in the stamp pad. So the same thing, smush and gush to get some ink at the top with some water. Use a paintbrush. Okay. And remember, the color will sort of lighten as you work. So be strategic in your movement of your brush. Oh, I like how that turned out. This is for the hooves. A little bit darker. There we go. I like that better. That's simply using a paintbrush, a little water, and your stamp pads once again. So if you have a good paintbrush with a narrow tip, and you don't want to fool with Q-tips, you can use that as well. Okay, technique number 8. This one is actually one that I actually messed up a little bit, but I kind of like how it turned out. So in theory, what you would do is you're going to apply color to your block. So that's what I'm going to do now using the Stampin Write markers. Okay, and then I'm going to place it on top of my image like that. Okay, so I'm going to kind of use like a rainbow effect with darker to lighter. Now where I messed up is, you probably can't tell, but the spritzer I used had some glimmer paint in it instead of just plain water, but that's okay. You can use glimmer paint or water. Okay, so I've got my colors on there and it's kind of hard to see, and what I want to do is I want to just spritz it with water like that. Do one more spritz, and it kind of makes the colors run a little bit. And then I'm going to get my colors run a little bit more, and I'm going to take it and plop it on top of my image, and you can see it soaking into the paper, and then you just let it dry. So it's kind of an interesting way that you can color an image without coloring it. And then I kind of like that effect. It's just different. And then I would put the saying up under it. All right, so we talked today about 8 different ways that we can color our stamped image. And there are other ways. These are just some of the ones that I use. The first way is we used watercolor pencils. The second way, we used the Stampin Blends. The third way, we use the Stampin Write markers right here. The fourth way, we used a blender pen with the Stampin Write markers. The fifth way, I used the Aqua Brush with the Stampin Write markers. I did better the second time around on that one, didn't I? And then the sixth way, that's this one, these two, we use the Q-tip method. The seventh one, we used our paintbrush with our Stampin' Write markers. And then finally, we just applied color to our acrylic block, squirted it to blend the colors, and then just laid it on top. What you would do with that also is you could put your colors on here, put it on a piece of white paper, and then stamp the image on top once it's dried. But I did my pre-stamping ahead of time. All right, I hope that you enjoyed this video today on the different ways to color your stamped image. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.